What is up, YouTube? Nintendo 64 fun time coming back at you today. Got a fun video for you, and what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about guilty pleasure games. What are your guilty pleasure games? Now, I define a guilty pleasure game as a game that, maybe not necessarily a lot of people are playing, but you always kind of come back to it. Or maybe it's a game that you would be embarrassed to tell somebody that you're playing, or that nobody else likes this game, but for whatever reason, you just really like this game. And it's got to be a game that you kind of continually come back to and play from time to time. We all have these games. We all have the guilty pleasure games. And they're fun, and I feel like they kind of, in some odd way, shape us who we are as gamers and give us a little bit of personality. So here we go. I'm going to put together 6 guilty pleasure games that I have. These aren't the only ones that I have. These aren't the top 6. These are just 6 that I just kind of randomly thought of the other day, and I figured this would be fun to share with you guys. Alright, so starting out, number 1, we're going to go Sega Bass Fishing for the Sega Dreamcast. Now you think, a fishing game? How can that even remotely be fun? Why would I want to play that? It's amazing because it's an arcade style fishing game, so you can just keep going and going and going. You don't have to worry about all the other stuff like a sim style fishing game where it's really boring. This is very fun. You're catching a fish almost every cast, and honestly, most of the time when I turn on my Dreamcast, I'm popping Sega Bass Fishing in. I don't know why I love it. I do love fishing, but there's just something about this game. The only game that has come close to being as good as a fishing game as Sega Bass Fishing is the Rapala Fishing for the Wii. But the motion controls were fun, but for whatever reason I still come back to the Sega Bass Fishing for the Sega Dreamcast. They do make a fishing pole attachment controller for the Sega Dreamcast. I don't have it. I would love to have it. It's a little bit expensive, but that would just blow my mind if I could do that game with the actual fishing pole. But yeah, I love Sega Bass Fishing. Still come back to it. Number 2, the Adventures of Lolo for the NES. They had 3 separate Lolo games that came out in the NES's lifespan, and if you just look at the box cover, if you look at the cover, you're going to think that, oh, this is some sort of cutesy game, blue and pink puffballs running around on some like weird adventure. Why would I want to play this? But if you don't know, The Adventures of Lolo is probably one of the best puzzle games of all time. It's wonderful because it slowly brings you into the game. You kind of get a feel for what you're doing, and then all of a sudden it just gets absolutely brutal, and you are so angry. You're cursing at the screen. You're throwing your NES down, NES controller down, in just frustration on some of these puzzles. And basically, you're just moving stuff around the puzzle to avoid enemies and to get keys to open doors. It sounds very simple, but it's very complex, and each Lolo game adds just a little bit more to make you wanting to come back. But like I said, if somebody doesn't know about these games and you say The Adventures of Lolo, The Adventures of Lolo, nobody's going to take you seriously. Everybody's going to think you're weird for liking that. But the people who have played this game know that these games are amazing. Alright, number 3, a game that might not be considered a guilty pleasure for one reason, because this is actually a pretty popular game and I know people really like it, but the question is, do people actually still go back and play it? I do. Aladdin for the Sega Genesis. It's got to be the Sega Genesis version because we all know the SNES version was not as good as the Genesis. So the Sega Genesis version of Aladdin was just so good, and I think there's something about the animation style of that game and the Genesis and the ability to put all those colors on the screen, and it aged so well. If you go back and play the Aladdin game for the Sega Genesis, it still looks so good, and I think it's kind of the cartoony animation style and how well they made this game. There's such a fun factor to it with kind of the collecting. It's kind of a side scroller, but you're kind of going back and forth, and the level seems a little bit dynamic in that sense. The boss battles are fun, and it's a really good lighthearted game. It was one of my favorite movies as a kid growing up, so I feel like I have that connection to it. And the game, for the most part, kind of follows the movie to where you're like, oh yeah, I remember this from the movie, this is really cool, or oh yeah, this is really cool, I'm happy they added that detail into the game. They did a really good job with that. So I love that game. I still go back and play that game quite a bit. So moving on to number 4, this one is an absolute turd of a game. I don't know why I like this game, but for whatever reason, it has charm. The battle mechanic is really terrible, but Quest 64. I know pretty much everybody hated that game, but I think why I like it so much is just the fact that it was one of the only RPGs for the Nintendo 64, and I was kind of forced to play it as far as like, this is what we had, and I feel like I kind of learned to like it once you kind of get the battle mechanic down, where you're only able to move inside of this grid and you have to get close enough. It's very similar to Aiden Chronicles if you played that game. But as far as Quest 64 goes, like, the environments are so bare, and there's the fog with the Nintendo 64, but the environments just seem so bare. It's like, did they even finish the game? There was so many separate parts of that game where I was like, they didn't even finish the game. This area is just so bleak and dreary, and they like tried to make it a field, but there's nothing in here. And then, like I said, the battle mechanic is just kind of odd. It's something that nobody ever did, because they're like, oh, let's try to make this 3D RPG, so nobody really figured out what that would be, so they kind of made Quest 64. It was pretty terrible in that sense. And then the fact that the game is so linear. One of the things I like about RPG games is to be able to travel around in the world and kind of go where you want to. Sometimes in the Final Fantasy games you get a ship so you can kind of get to other places in this world, fight old monsters and all that stuff. This game really didn't have that. It was extremely linear. There were some areas where you couldn't really come back, and it was just very linear, and it was like, this is not how an RPG is supposed to be. That being said, all of those terrible things I said about the game, I still love it. I still go back and play it from time to time. I still, for whatever reason, play this game. Maybe not every year, but I come back to it every now and again, and I enjoy it all the same. But I know it's a game that everybody hated, and I kind of hate it too, but I still have this draw to play it. And I definitely feel ashamed playing that game, because nobody likes it, except possibly me. Number 5, so we're moving on a little bit here. Now, I've already talked about how much I like the SimCity games up until SimCity 3000, before EA kind of ruined the franchise. SimCity 4 was okay. SimCity 3000 I think was the best. But when SimCity 2000 came out, there was a whole bunch of sim games that came out around that. One of them being SimFarm. So number 5 is going to be SimFarm. It's probably a game that nobody's ever really played. If you've played it, I would actually be surprised. But SimFarm, take Harvest Moon in its basic aspects, and that's kind of what you have. You know, with all the sim games, it's kind of a god mode where you're not playing an actual character, you're playing kind of this god character where you're looking down and you're manipulating everything and things kind of just do your bidding. It was very much like, you know, you plant the corn, you harvest the corn, you can fast forward to cheetah speed just like you can in the other SimCity games. You can have animals and they grow and then you sell them. And that's pretty much it. That's pretty much all you do. But for whatever reason, I really like this game because it's before, like, I know cell phones now have a lot of like idle farming style games or idle games. This was an idle kind of farming style resource gathering game before those were a thing. You'd log on and time would have passed in your farm, and you kind of, you know, go from there and earn money. And we always were like, hey, who can get to $1 million first in SimFarm? Because I had a group of friends who actually played that game. But I still go, I have an older PC and I still kind of go onto it and check my farm and see how it's doing, and, you know, still going. But kind of a weird game, but there's kind of that, I don't know, that idle farming game that are so popular on cell phones. It was like that, and I was addicted to that game style back when I was a kid. So I really, really, really liked that game, but I don't think anybody ever played it. And I think if we were to go back and play it now, you'd be like, this is so dumb. I have Stardew Valley. I got New Harvest Moons, man. Why are we playing this game? But SimFarm, pretty good game. I don't know, guilty pleasure game. There you go. So we're moving on to number 6, and I don't really know anybody who plays this game, but I still play this game all the time on my computer when I'm bored. Minesweeper. Every computer had Minesweeper on it. Well, every PC, I should say, every Windows PC has Minesweeper on it. And it's basically just more or less like a math logic game. You have a mine and you have spaces, and each space will tell you how many mines are touching that space, so you kind of have to deduce where the mines are and where they aren't. It's really fun. If you have a PC and you've never played Minesweeper, go play Minesweeper. It's on your computer. You don't have to worry about it. It's already there. You don't have to even go look for it. But it's just so fun. It's kind of like that passive game that you can mindlessly play. And I think that a lot of people were super into Solitaire or Free Cell, two other games that come on a PC, a Windows PC, you know, by default. But I think I wanted to not play those games as a kid because everybody was playing Solitaire or Free Cell. So I was like, I'm going to play Minesweeper and be a nerd and play with numbers. Doot, 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 doot. But it's kind of nice because it keeps your mind sharp. It's like solving a puzzle. It's very similar to how your mind would think if you were solving like a Sudoku puzzle. And I still like it. I still go today. I can beat the medium and the hardest version and everything like that, and you can make custom levels. It's really, really, really fun, but it's kind of one of those mindless kind of plug-away games that is already on your computer, but I don't know if people still play that game. If you do still play that game, you know, you're probably doing it the same way I do, where you're kind of just mindlessly playing the games. So I don't know, that was kind of fun. That was something that I thought of yesterday and just kind of wanted to share you guys. A few of my guilty pleasure games, like I said, I have more, but those were just the handful that I was able to think of and just kind of write down real quick while I was at work yesterday. So there you go. What are your guilty pleasure games? Do you have any guilty pleasure games? Go back and think when you were a kid or now. What games do you go back and play that you might be ashamed to tell your best friend that you still play? So, I don't know, share those with me and let me see what your guilty pleasure games are. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter. I do plenty of fun stuff on there where you guys can participate with my channel and suggest upcoming episodes. Like and subscribe down below if you liked and you want to subscribe to my channel. I always appreciate that. Nintendo 64 fun time. Be nice, stay positive, always be gaming.